Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio and welcome to week 43 of the Stash Buster block series. The block this week is called Friendship Quilt Block, and here is a sample. It is made up of flying geese units and half square units, and it actually goes together pretty easily, so I hope you'll stick around and I'll show you how to put this one together. Here are the fabrics you're going to need to make the Friendship Quilt square. You're going to need, of your main fabric, you're going to need 2 pieces that are 4 7/8 inch square, and then you'll need 8 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5 inch. And then for your background, you'll need 2 pieces that are 4 7/8 of an inch square, and you're going to draw a line on the wrong side on the diagonal ones, so from one corner to the opposite. You'll need 1 piece that is 4.5 inches square, and then you'll need 16 pieces that are 2.5 inches square, and you'll need to draw a diagonal line on those pieces too on the wrong side. So we're going to get started first by making the half square triangles. So we will be using the 4 7/8 inch squares out of both the main color and the background. So we're going to pair those up, wrong sides together, and we're going to draw, and then we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from this drawn line on both sides. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. Okay, here's the first set of squares, and I'm just going to use my 1/4 inch piecing foot, and I've got a 50 weight thread in my needle and my bobbin. And then I'm just going to swing it around and then give myself a little slack on the thread and sew down the other side. Okay, so there's the first set, and then I'll do the second set. Okay, now we can cut these apart, and you can use your rotary cutter and cut on the drawn line, or I'm just going to use my scissors because my scissors are right here by my sewing machine. So I'm going to cut those in half, and then I'm going to press, and I'm going to press the press towards the darker fabric, which is my aqua colored fabric. So I'm going to lay these with the dark side up and then press it towards the darker fabric, and do that to all 4 pieces. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is to trim off the dog ears, and that is to eliminate extra bulk and make the accuracy of my piecing better. Okay, so we're going to set these aside. Now we're going to work on the flying geese units. Okay, for your flying geese units, when you place your 2.5 inch square, you want the line you drew on there to go from the center of one side to the opposite corner. So here it starts here and it ends here, and I want to stitch on that line. And I'm going to move that out of the way, and I'm going to do another piece. Now these work best, this method works best if you do one side, trim it, and then press it, and then do the other side. So I'm going to do one side of each rectangle, and then do the pressing and the trimming, and then do the other side of the triangle, of the flying geese unit. Okay, now I'm going to trim off the outer corner and leave a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then after I've trimmed all of those, I'm going to go to pressing them, and I'm going to press them out. I'll press those triangles out. So I'm pressing towards the light instead of the dark, but this will help in several different areas of putting the block together. And this is normally how you do it with flying geese blocks anyway. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to trim them all down. Okay, now we're going to put the other square on, and we're going to line this one up so that it goes from the center to the opposite bottom corner. So it goes from here to there. You don't want it going from here to there, because if you did, you would wind up with something that looks like that. So make sure you have this one so that your line goes from the center to the opposite bottom corner. And we'll sew those on, and I'm going to start in the center of the block and go towards the outer corner. And I'll do that for all 8 flying geese units. Okay, now I'm going to cut these apart, and then I'll trim off the triangles and press them out, and then we'll sew them together to make a square, and then we'll lay out the pieces for our block and sew it together. So on this one, I'm also going to cut off the outer triangle. So we have that, and then I'll press it open so we'll have a flying geese unit. Okay, now we have to sew all of these flying geese units together to make a square. So we're going to sew 2 of them together, and we're going to turn them so that we can see the back side of the flying geese unit, the point there. So what we want to do is to sew, okay, where the 2 stitching lines cross, right there, we want to sew just to the seam side of that intersection right there. We don't want to sew right through it. We want to sew on this side of it, just by a couple of threads, and that will help the point to show. It won't cut it off, and you'll have a nice looking block when you get done. So let's get started on those. Now when we sew the whole block together, there's going to be several areas where you have to watch points, and I'll show you a couple of tips on that when we get to that point. So here we go. So you can see this one's pretty close, but you can see the full tip of that point. So this is what you want. So we want to make 4 of these kinds of units. So we're just going to keep sewing them together, and you can chain piece these. Okay, so for these units, I'm going to press towards the base of the top flying geese unit. So like that. So you've got the seam pressed up away from the point, and that will give you a better looking point, and it's going to help things line up better too when we sew the block together. So we'll get this one. Okay, they all turned out pretty good. So now we're going to lay out the pieces of the block, and we're going to start with the center, and then the flying geese units are going to face that center block. Just like that. And then the half square triangles, the white goes towards the center. Now if you're familiar with the T block, you will see the T in here. I don't know if this is a variation of it, if this is where that came from, but I think the T block, I think the center is different if I remember correctly. But anyway, there we go. So it's all laid out. So we're going to sew them together in rows and then sew all the rows together. So we're going to sew these 2 pieces together first. We have this seam here and this seam here, and they need to meet. We need to match them. Now luckily, the way I press things, this seam is going towards the dark, this one's going towards the light, so those 2 seams will nest together, so that's great. Now we have a point here we want to watch, and we don't want to blunt it off, and we don't want to have too much of the background showing. So I'm going to turn it this way, and sew from with the flying geese on the top. But as you'll notice, you can't see the lines where they cross here, the stitching lines. Now you could press that this way if you want, so you can see that. What that does is creates a lot of bulk right there, and the block doesn't lay as nicely. So I've got another trick that I use in this instance, and it requires a pen and a pencil, and see where the lines cross. I'm going to stick the pen right there, and I'm going to go through both seams and come out the other side. Hopefully you can see that. Let me okay, so where the seams cross here, I'm putting the pin in, and I'm, instead of going all the way through the block, I'm having it go through the back of the seam right here, so you can see where it's coming out right there. Now I'm just going to kind of run it parallel to the raw edge, and then I'm going to draw a line on the seam side of that pin. So if you've got your pin straight, you're in good shape, and you can do it on both sides if you want, but you just kind of need a guide right before you get up to that seam. Okay, so we're going to lay them together like this. We're going to have this seam nested together so that there's no space between them. They feel even. And then when we get down to this point on sewing, we know this line is drawn on the outside of that pin, so if we stay on this side and don't go over that line, then we know we're going to have a point that's going to show. So let's go to the sewing machine, see if we can do that. Okay, I got these two seams nested together. My raw edge is lined up here. And I can see my pencil mark, and I'm to the right side of that. The needle's hitting right to the right side of that, so I know I'm doing okay there. So let's take a look at that and see how that turned out. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We've got a nice point here, and then these two seams match up, so we're doing good. So now we need to add this half square triangle, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn it so that I can see the flying geese side, and I'm going to put my pin through and draw my line. So here's my pin sticking through that point, and draw a little line there. This also helps you can see your seams here and keep them from flipping up on you. So let's see how this seam went. Okay, I'm happy with that one too. Okay, so we have row 1. So now we need to do row 2. So we're going to sew this flying geese unit to the center square. So put them right sides together, and I need to watch this point here, and I can see where the stitching lines cross, so I don't have to do anything other than watch that as I sew up to it and make sure I sew just to the right of that. Okay, so we have that, and now let's sew the other flying geese to it and do the same thing. And I think this one's okay too. Yep. So there is that seam right there. Okay. And my last row. Okay, I'm going to stick the pin through the point. And this is a very wide seam here. And lined up these two bottom seams. Okay. And then here is the bottom row. Get that open. Okay. So now we're going to press and then sew the rows together. Now to press these rows, I am going to press away from the flying geese units and do that on all of the rows. So that means on this bottom row, I'm going to press out. In this row, I'm going to press in. Towards that center square. And this row, I'm going to press out. Okay. Now we can sew the rows together. So now we have these two seams need to match. I have a point we need to watch. That seam needs to match. We have to watch that point, match this seam, watch that point, and match these two seams together. So there's a lot going on, and most of it is going on in the center. So I'm going to flip it like this and sew it from this direction. So that means these two seams will nest together. So as long as I get those nested together, that will work fine. I'm going to go ahead and pin that. This seam, I got to do my little pin trick and put the pin through and get my pencil and draw a little mark. These two seams need to match, and those should nest together because I have them pressed in opposite directions like that. So those should go together okay. So I'm going to pin those. This one, I can actually see this white fabric is fairly thin, so I can see through it, so I can see that. But if you can't, use your pen, go through the point here, right where that is, and I'm going to face it this way and then draw a line going right across that on both sides like that, and then straighten that up and pin it again, and that will keep. And what I'm doing is keeping the fabric straight. I don't want it to kind of slide, so I know to sew on the outer side of that drawn line. So these two seams need to meet, and they will nest together. And then I need to watch this point. I turn it this way. And I'm going to stick my pin in and draw my line on the outside. And then I'm going to nest these two seams together. So that's a lot of matching and nesting of seams. So we're going to sew this, and then we'll do the same thing with this side. On this side, I've got the majority of the flying geese facing towards me. And I'm coming across my first point, and I got some threads here I need to get out of my way. And I can see my pencil mark. And these two seams are nested together. And then here I come to another pencil point or pencil mark. So here I'm coming to another pencil mark. And keep to the right of that. This seam is nested, and I'm coming to another pencil marking, and I need to watch that and guide my seam allowance. It's wanting to flip, and then the last seam down here is nested together. Okay, now to see how that turned out. Now on my sample it worked really well, so let's see how it did here. And actually, I'm pretty happy. So all of those, you can see those points there, this seam matches. You can see those points pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's do the last row and do the same thing. Okay, now let's go press the block and see what we have. Okay, so now we need to press, and I'm going to press the seams flat first, and then on my sample block, look at that, I pressed the seams out. So away from the center. So there we go. Okay, now I have 4 of the blocks pinned up to my design wall, and I've got them in two different fabrics, so one's a deeper green than the other. But this is what you would get if you place them in a straight set, which is just side by side without any sashing or alternate blocks or anything between them. So it gives you kind of a interesting look. I think it's different. You get like an hourglass design in the center, and it's almost look like a cutout, almost like a snowflake type effect, in my opinion. So that is what you would get with that. Now, if you alternated the block or rotated a block or two, you'd get the same look because it is a symmetrical block. It's the same on all four corners, so you wouldn't get anything different. If you wanted to do that, you would have to change the colors within the block. Like maybe on the half square triangles have two opposite corners a different color, or have the flying geese a different color. You know, something like that would make it look different when you put this block together with other blocks of the same kind. So that's just options that you can do. I hope you enjoyed this video on the Friendship Quilt block, and I hope you'll give this one a try. The sewing is pretty simple as far as making the units for the block. It's when you sew the rows together, having to watch all the seams and the points. That's what takes the most time, and even at that, with those little tips I gave you, I think you'll be able to do that one fairly easily. So I hope you do give this one a try, and change up the colors if you like. You know, you could do more than just two colors in this block, and you make it unique. So if you like this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.